Einstein on the Beach is an opera like no other. There is no story, no hero or heroine, no obvious links between words, images, and music. A scene lasting 30 minutes may consist of a single image that changes at an almost glacial pace. The music may sustain a single note for minutes or explode in contagiously rhythmic combinations of voice, violin, and amplified instruments. It is an opera where dancers are the featured performers. The American premiere of Einstein on the Beach in 1976 changed forever the image of opera. As a work of music theater, Einstein on the Beach falls somewhere between a spectacle and a meditation. It is a work that challenges the audience to rethink the definition of opera.
People said in the beginning, well, it's obviously not a play because it didn't have a text, it told a story. And they said, well, it's not a dance because it's not just dance. And they said, well, it's not a painting because it's not a painting. So I called them operas because it means opus or work. And I still think that's the best way to describe it. And with Einstein on the Beach, you have all the conventions of an opera in that it's within a proscenium arch. You have an orchestra pit with musicians. You have singers. You have recitative parts. You have parts that are sung. So in a sense, it is an opera. It doesn't tell a story. It's not a narrative form. It's not something that is trying to illustrate the way history books do Einstein, but it's trying to present a poetical interpretation of this man.
Now, we have the slide projector on, right, to try to get rid of the shadows. But the mirror effect, are we still going to try that? Or?
In the fall of 1984, Einstein on the Beach was restaged at the Brooklyn Academy of Music as part of the Next Wave Festival. It was the first time since the opera's premiere that its principal creators, composer Philip Glass and designer-director Robert Wilson, had restaged the work. In the Brooklyn production, the opera's two dances were choreographed by Lucinda Childs. Childs and Cheryl Sutton are the two featured performers. They have appeared in every production of the opera. As a work of music theater, Einstein on the Beach places extraordinary demands on the musicianship, technique, and endurance of its performers. It lasts 4.5 hours without intermission. Each tableau is assembled from images and actions that must fit together precisely in time and space.
1, 2, 3, turn the head, 2, no, 1, 2, 3, 4, 4 counts coming back. Pause, look up, stage for 3, head back and 4. Okay, try it.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Okay, walk.
Einstein on the Beach deals not with biography or history, but instead takes off from the popular image of Einstein.
It was the most natural thing for us to take an idea and decide to make an opera. Bob was interested in Chaplin. I was not so interested in Chaplin. I felt that to do a piece about a man who was already a great performer, I couldn't see how we could do it. I mean, it seemed that we would have to have a Chaplin-like person, whereas because Chaplin himself was a performer, I saw problems with that. Then Bob suggested Einstein, and I liked the idea very much. It was a subject that had interested me as a boy, in growing up in Baltimore right after the war, the Second World War. Einstein was very much in the news because of atomic energy, and so there were, even as children, we were constantly barraged with popular books about relativity and Einstein, atomic energy, and all this stuff. So it was something that was part of my childhood. What I saw, in fact, that we had done with Einstein was that we had taken a person and made it the subject of the piece. It was a way, in a certain way, of the person replaces the idea of plot, of story. In other words, the character of the person becomes what the piece is about. The more you know about the person, the better.
This is not a historical representation of Einstein. It's a poetical work about Einstein. So we come to the theater sharing something, knowing something about this mythic god who is known generally by the man on the street, just as Racine wrote about gods of his time, Euripides wrote about the gods of his time. In a sense, Einstein's like a mythic character. He's someone that is generally known by the public. So we come to the theater already knowing something, sharing something, knowing a story. So in a sense, we don't have to tell a story. We can present a piece of poetry in which people bring to the theater a certain knowledge and see these pictures.
The vocabulary of the opera is not that of traditional narrative. It works by association, the sense of a shared dream. Einstein himself said, "The most beautiful experience we can have is the mysterious."
This Court of Common Pleas is now in session.
This Court of Common Pleas is now in session.
For too long have we been trodden under the feet of men. For too long have we been treated as second-class citizens by men who say that we are only good for cooking their meals, mending their sons, and raising their babies.
Clearly, this is very different from, let's say, if we went to see Oklahoma, which, by the way, I can enjoy as well as everybody else. But when I go to Oklahoma, I know I'm not going to see Einstein on the beach. I think if you go to Einstein on the beach expecting Oklahoma, you're going to be pretty disappointed. On the other hand, if you go to Oklahoma expecting Einstein, you're going to be disappointed too. So I think we're talking about ways that we're talking really about a profoundly different way of relating to the theater, to music theater, and it's something that has come about in our time.
For the audience experiencing Einstein on the beach for the first time, the opera's juxtapositions of music and image are often unexpected. In the universe according to Albert Einstein, when anything moves faster, time itself slows down. Wilson and Glass emerged from the New York art world in the 1960s. Their collaboration began at a time when music theater was at the center of experimentation in the arts.
I grew up in a theater that was not based on a literary tradition. For example, it would never occur to me to take a play and set it to music. Well, in fact, a lot of operas have done that way. Butterfly was done that way. The Shakespeare operas of Verdi were done that way. Where a play would be taken and then it would simply be adapted to an opera. It never occurred to me to begin with a literary product and then turn it into a musical theater product. That's not the way that the theater that I came from didn't work with text to begin with.
So if you take your glasses off, the reason to are great. But you have the final center. The center is it could be a balloon. It could be a very sincere for these workers. It could be very...
In the traditional one, if you look at the plays of Shakespeare, and much of the modern literature is modeled on that, you're talking about the identification of the audience with the hero. It depends on a certain confusion of mind, actually. You have to get yourself mixed up with Hamlet. You have to say, well, that's me, somehow his like me or I am him, and whatever happens to him happens to you, and the epiphany of the work becomes when the tragic flaw of the character is revealed, and there we are stuck with him, and it becomes our tragedy. This, I call it a kind of confusion, because in fact we walk out of the play. We're no closer to being Hamlet after the play than we were before. But in the course of the evening, we've managed to get ourselves in this state of mind. I would say that the kind of theater that we've been talking about does not operate on that mechanism. Something else happens. And it's quite an interesting experience. First, I would describe how it happened to me the first time. I remember working on a piece called Comedy by Beckett. It's a play about three people who are dead, and they're in errands, and they're speaking from the afterlife somehow. I saw it many times, and what I noticed was that the emotional high of the evening would happen every night in a different place. Now, if I were looking at a play of Shakespeare, it would happen every night in the same place, if it were well done. And I was very curious, why should that happen? That every night when I watch this play, the epiphany of the play happened in a different place. And I finally came to the conclusion. What was really happening was that the mechanism had not to do with my getting involved with the piece, but being separated from the piece. And I would say that a lot of the modern theater that we're doing depends on something like that.
So you know they don't make clothes for people who wear glasses. There's no pockets anymore, so if you take your glasses off, they're easy to lose or break. New York Phonics Center has the answer to your problem. Contactless lenses in the new soft lenses. The center gives you 30 days and see if you like it. And if you like it, and if you don't, they could refund your money except for the examination fee. So if you're tired of wearing glasses, contact New York Phonics Center. For sight with no hassle, please call BR95555. Do you know they don't make clothes for people who wear glasses? There's no pockets anymore. So if you take your glasses off, they're easy to lose or break. New York Phonics Center has the answer to your problem. Contactless lenses in the new soft lenses. The center gives you 30 days and see if you like it. And if you like it, and if you don't, they could refund your money except for the examination fee. So if you're tired of wearing glasses, contact New York Phonics Center. The center gives you 30 days and see if you like it. And if you like it, and if you don't, they could refund your money except for the examination fee. So for sight with no hassle, please call BR95555. BR95555.
In the universe according to Einstein, the context in which an object is placed determines how we see it.
In making Einstein, I thought about gestures or movements as something separate. And then I thought about light as, again, something separate. Then the decor, the environments, the painted drops, the furniture, and they're all separate. And then you take all of these screens of visual images that are layered against each other, and sometimes they don't align either, or sometimes they do. If you take a Baroque candelabra and you put it on a Baroque table, that's one thing. But if you take a Baroque candelabra and you place it on a giant rock, that's something else. And maybe it's easier to see the candelabra when it's on a rock than if it's on the table. And in this theater, it's about that. It's how do we see? How do I see the rock and how do I see the candelabra? And then how do I hear?
Robert Wilson's conception of theater is rooted in the visual arts. When he came to New York from Texas in 1962, he came to study architecture, not theater.
I went to Broadway and I hated it, and I still hate it. And when I went to the opera, I hated it. I still hate it. And then I saw Balanchine's work and I liked it, and I still like it. And then I saw Merce Cunningham and John Cage's work and I liked it, and I still like it. So that was the first big influence, I think, on my work. At that time I wasn't thinking about working in the theater at all. But in looking back now, that was the first major influence. And the second big influence was when I adopted this 13-year-old black deaf-mute child who was living in New Jersey, had come from Alabama and Georgia. And he didn't know any words, and I thought in terms of words. And I thought he was intelligent, and I learned that, or came to realize that he thought in terms of pictures and signs and signals, and that's how he thought about things. So my first big work was made with him, The Deaf Man Glance, which was 7 hours long and 4 acts, and was completely silent. It was, as the French said, they called it a silent opera. And I thought that was a very good way to describe it, because it was structured silences. And then the next big influence was when I met Christopher Knowles, a 13-year-old child who was living in an institution for brain-damaged, brain-injured children. And he was preoccupied with mathematics and geometry, especially, and with language. And the way he was arranging words and sounds was not unlike Mozart. And that there were classical compositions and things placed not arbitrarily, but for content of the language, but also very much for the sound and how the sound was structured. And that's when I introduced words in my play. I asked Chris once here in this apartment, I said, Chris, who is Einstein? And he said, I don't know. And I said, Chris, who is Einstein? And he said, I don't know. I said, Chris, who is Einstein? He said, I don't know. I said, Chris, who is Einstein? He said, I don't know. I said, Chris, who is Einstein? He said, I don't know. I said, Chris, who is Einstein? He said, I don't know. I said, Chris, who is Einstein? He said, I don't know. I said, Chris, who's Einstein? He said, I don't know. I said, Chris, who is Einstein? He said, let me think. And then he wrote 12 chapters, and he gave them to me a couple of days later. And it went something like, will I get some wind for the sailboat? And it could be these 4 ideas. It could be Frankie, it could be Johnny, it could be a balloon, etc.
Mr. Bojangles, Mr. Bojangles, Mr. Bojangles. So if you see any of those baggy pants, chuck the heels. And if you know it was a violin to be, answer the telephone. Mr. Bojangles, Mr. Bojangles. So if you see any of those baggy pants, chuck the heels. And if you know it was a violin to be, answer the telephone. And if anyone asks you, please, it was trees. It is like that. Mr. Bojangles, Mr. Bojangles, Mr. Bojangles, I reach you. Mr. Bojangles. So if you see any of those baggy pants, chuck the heels. And if you know it was a violin to be, answer the telephone. And if anyone asks you, please, it was trees. It is like that. Mr. Bojangles, Mr. Bojangles, Mr. Bojangles, I reach you. Mr. Bojangles. So if you see any of those baggy pants, chuck the hills. And if you know it was a violin to be, answer the telephone. And if anyone asks you, please, it is trees. It is like that. Mr. Bojangles, I reach you. The scarf of wear in black and white. This about the things on the table. So this one has been being very American. So this could be like a
actors, the vaudevillian actors, would probably be the best ones for my work because it's dealing with timing. You see, Jack Benny, when he worked so beautifully with TV because he held his arms this way and it was a perfect frame for TV. And he goes da 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 ba 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 da da ba do ba da ka boo ba ka ka boo bum boo. And that's when you get the laugh. You know, you got on boo, you know that it's funny, but you don't laugh. You wait till him go. And if he's 1 second off, you don't get the laugh. And it's timing. My work is a lot about that. One goes through the movements the way a choreographer works with a dancer, and where the gestures are thought about actually separate from the text.
1, 2, 2, 2, 3, 2, 4, 2, 1, 2, 3, 2, 2, 3, 2, 3, 4, 2, 3, 1, 2, 2, 3, 2, 3, 4, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 2, 2, 3, 2, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 2, 3, 3, 5, 5, 6, 6. 7, 7, 8, 8, 1, 2, 3, 3.
Be very careful with the controlling of the line of the head here.
Yes. I'm the kind of director that is not afraid of repeating something over and over and over.
2, 2, 3, 4, 4, 5, 5, 6, 6.
Because as I said earlier, I think that the more mechanical we are, the more we do it, the more we understand about it. Many people think that it loses life, but I don't think so. I think you become freer. And in this work, it's very formal. The gestures are counted and repeated and rehearsed, and people are afraid of that in the beginning, of counting numbers and learning this. But once one learns it and can do it without thinking so much about it, then one is free to think about other things.
I was in this prematurely air-conditioned supermarket, and there were all these aisles, and there were these bathing caps that you could buy that had these kind of 4th of July blooms on them that were red and yellow and blue. And I wasn't tempted to buy one, but I was reminded of the fact that I had been avoiding the beach. I was in this prematurely air-conditioned supermarket, and there were all these aisles, and there were these bathing caps that you could buy that had these kind of 4th of July blooms on them, were red and yellow and blue. And I wasn't tempted to buy one, but I was reminded of the fact that I had been avoiding the beach. I was in this prematurely air-conditioned supermarket, and there were all these aisles, and there were these bathing caps that you could buy that had these kind of 4th of July plumes on them, and I wasn't tempted to buy one, but I was reminded of the fact that I had been avoiding the beach. I was in this prematurely air-conditioned supermarket, and there were all these aisles, and there were these bathing caps that you could buy that had these kind of 4th of July plumes on them that were red and yellow and blue. And I wasn't tempted to buy one, but I was reminded of the fact that I had been avoiding the beach. I was in this prematurely air-conditioned supermarket, and there were all these aisles. And there were these bathing caps that you could buy that had these kind of 4th of July plumes on them that were red and yellow and blue. And I wasn't tempted to buy one, but I was reminded of the fact that I had been avoiding the beach. I was in this prematurely air-conditioned supermarket, and there were all these aisles. And there were these bathing caps that you could buy with these kind of 4th of July plumes on them that were red and yellow and blue. And I wasn't tempted to buy one, but I was reminded of the fact that I had been avoiding the beach. I was in this prematurely air-conditioned supermarket, and there were all these aisles. And there were these bathing caps that you could buy that had these kind of 4th of July plumes on them that were red and yellow and blue. And I wasn't tempted to buy one, but I was reminded of the fact that I had been avoiding the beach. I was in this prematurely air-conditioned supermarket.
I constructed the work and the 3 traditional ways of looking at painting, which are the 3 traditional ways of measuring space, and that is in portraits, still lifes, and landscapes. If I see my hand here, I can think of it as a portrait, so the space is from here to there. If I put my hand over here and look at it, I see it with other things, and I can think of that perhaps as a still life. But if I took a photograph of my hand and put it 4 miles over there, it becomes a part of a landscape. So those are 3 ways of measuring space. And in Einstein, I thought about that. The knee plays to me were portraits. They're the closest to the audience. And so we look at it in a different way. And then I thought of the trains and the trials and the building, those scenes as still lives. But the dance I thought about differently. I thought about them as landscapes, as fields. And so the space is the biggest. And they break apart the space. So the energy is different, the perspective is different, and it happens twice.
For the Next Wave Festival's production, the opera's 2 dances were performed by dancers from the Lucinda Childs Dance Company. universe according to Einstein, everything that happens has a reason, even if we don't know what it is.
I mean, we're talking about very associational work that comes up through a kind of confidence that the artists have in the meaningfulness of their associations on or their let's say their communal associations on a subject. It's not a question of what Einstein means; it's that it's meaningful, and that's the point. It's like any poem or any painting. We may not know exactly what it means, but we know that it means something to us. This is a period that's been rich in novel and inspiring ways of thinking about the theater. Whether the source is associational, a kind of a dream in a way, I don't think it's so important. It's the act of perception that's been altered for all time, as far as I can see.
No. No. No.
About myself, I had a very traditional training. I went to the Peabody Conservatory as a boy of 8. I studied flute till I was 15. I began writing music at 15. I went to the Juilliard School at 19. I then was in Paris in 1965, and I was asked to work with Ravi Shankar, the great Indian sitar player. And with Ravi, I first began to discover the power of rhythmic music, of ideas about rhythmic structure. And I saw that it was an area that I had never worked in before, that a piece could be organized around the idea of rhythm, and not, for example, harmony and melody that I had been taught. It was a very exciting idea for me. Now, I should say that by that time, I had probably written about 75 or so pieces. There are boxes of pieces. It's all in my brother's house in Baltimore somewhere. I hope he hasn't. And what if he doesn't? It doesn't matter, I don't think. I wrote, at that point, I had written 3 string quartets, several woodwind quintets, a couple of symphonic works, a violin concerto, about 20. I've written lots and lots of music. And I would say that none of it was very interesting. It was student music. And I knew it at the time, and I did it. It was okay. With Ravi, I suddenly saw another way of thinking about music, and I think it was the coming to the end of that kind of... I wasn't happy with the contemporary music that was being played at that time. So I traveled through Central Asia, I was in India, to look to outside the Western tradition. And I was working very much on the idea of rhythmic structure and different ways of relating that to an overall piece of music. And the idea of, if I was going to write music where the rhythmic structure was the important thing, I reduced the melodies or the notes to something very simple so that we could hear what the rhythms were. This occupied me, I'd say, for the next 9 years. Now, it's important in talking about this music to remember that it's hard to remember this now, but how new that music was at the time. And I could play a piece for 20 or 30 minutes on 5 notes. And the initial reaction was that no one would play the music. And this was a very important kind of turning point for me, because I realized that if the music was going to be played, I would have to play it. And I became a performer. I came back to New York shortly after that. I made some travels. I traveled a little bit in the East. Came back in the spring of '66, and by '68 I had an ensemble together. Many of them the same people that are playing with Einstein today. This probably was one of the most important things that I did, because I found myself part of a larger music world than I had known about. Before that, I'd been part of an academic music world, but now I found that I had more in common with people in pop music than in academic music. I guess, in a way, it became natural for me to work in the theater.
So that's almost becoming 3 to 2.
Yeah, but not quite. Not quite.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's not quite notable.
Okay, good.
The difficulty isn't that it keeps repeating, but it's that it almost never repeats. This is one of the secrets of the music, which is not generally heard. In fact, one of the difficulties of hearing this music at all is that to be able to hear that it's changing all the time it means shifting gears in the way you listen. So it's such a profound shift that many people simply don't make it. And they may like it or they may not like it. They say, oh, it's the same thing over and over again. In fact, it's something what's so difficult for the performers, in fact, that it's always so different. You're talking about vocabulary that can appear so radical compared to traditional vocabulary that at first time, at first glance, at first sight, at first hearing, it simply may not be heard at all.
In the original production of Einstein on the Beach, most of the performers were non-professionals who doubled as both dancers and singers. In the Brooklyn Academy of Music Production, the company was composed of professional singers and dancers, many of whom were unfamiliar with Wilson's theatrical concepts and Glass's music.
In knee play 3, there's a lot of counting going on. And we go from 1 to 3, 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 to a group of 5. It's a group of 6, and we go to 5. So it's going from 1 to 3, 1 to 3, 1 to 3, from 1 to 3, 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 1 to 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 it to perceive that, keep it constant. I wasn't very constant there. It's really very difficult.
We're raised in 4/4. Rock and roll is all in duple meter. We hear waltzes, we hear rock and roll, we hear a little bit of classical music, and it's almost all in regular meter. And we walk into this rehearsal, and somebody says, okay, this is groups of 5, this is groups of 7. And inevitably, somebody tries to make a group of 7 into a group of 8. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. The first thing you want to do with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 is say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, which makes the 7 into 8. So it can go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That's one of the first things you hear. And it's really 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3. And it's actually, it's something we're not raised with, and it takes a long time.
I thought it would drive me crazy, actually. And in learning it, it started to drive me crazy. And then I really started understanding what was going on, and now I love it. I think it's terrific. What keeps it interesting are the changes that happen. And certainly that's how we learn the music in many ways, is by learning the changes, not by... You learn something that's repeated over and over again, it's the same thing, and that's easy to learn, and what's confusing is how it changes. So you learn and structure in your mind how it changes. And I've come to be able to really hear those changes now.
Yeah. Well, I remember going through a period when I first heard this music of tremendous impatience, because it's so different than the music we're used to listening to. It goes, the tonal modulations, the harmonic changes go by so slowly that the first thing I felt was impatience, and the next thing I realized was that if I would slow down and be patient and listen to what was going on, that there is an entirely different world happening there of music. And it does correspond more to, like you said, the passing of a cloud. But it's not typical of a Western kind of American, put the rock and roll song on right now and we'll be satisfied right now and everything will be fine. It corresponds to relaxing and getting ready to listen at you kind of listen at a different speed after a while.
I think the experience of hearing Einstein this time round in 1984, one of the things for the audience, it's been much easier for the audience. The piece indeed was truly more radical in 1976, simply because that language was not generally known. Both the visual language, the dramatic language, the theater language, if you will, and the musical language. There was an ability to hear it, not just a willingness, but an ability to perceive it that simply wasn't there before. In fact, in just 10, 15 years, we begin to find a way to listen, to hear, to see, and it becomes simply the language of our time, the theater of our time, the dance of our time.
And perplexities is ended, and the night is now upon us. The night should be a time of peace and tranquility, a time to relax and be calm. We have need of a soothing story to banish the disturbing thoughts of the day. To set at rest our troubled minds and put at ease our ruffled spirits. And what sort of story shall we hear?
Well, I took the red ball.
It will be a familiar story. A story that is so very old, and yet it is so new. It is the old story of love. Two lovers sat on a park bench with their bodies touching each other, holding hands.
Frequently people ask me what my work is about, and I say I don't know. And I don't think it's a responsibility for an artist to necessarily understand what it is that he does. I talk a lot about the structure and the ideas and how it's put together, but ultimately that's not important to appreciate it. If I see a Balanchine ballet or I see a Japanese garden, I can appreciate it simply because I like it. And I think this piece is like that.
Impossible, you say? Yes. And it is just as impossible for me to say how much I love you. My love for you is higher than the heavens, deeper than Hades, broader than the earth. Once more her voice was heard. Kiss me, John. 2, 3. She implored. And, placing his arms gently about her, he pressed his lips warmly to hers in fervent osculation.
3.
Albert Einstein said, "The most beautiful experience we can have is the mysterious. It is the fundamental emotion which stands at the cradle of true art and true science."
I feel the earth move. Carol King. I feel the earth move. I feel the tumbling down, the tumbling down. I feel some ostriches like into a satchel, some like them. I went to the window and wanted to draw the earth. So when David Cassidy tells you, all of you, to get on going, get going, get going, so this could be like the WABC. Jay Reynolds from midnight to 6 a.m., Harry Harrison from 6 a.m. to 10 p.m., Ron Lundy from 10 p.m. to 2 p.m., Steve O'Brien from 4:30 a.m. to 6 a.m., Steve O'Brien from 4:30 a.m. to 6 a.m., Johnny Donovan from 4:30 a.m. to 6 a.m. I feel the earth move. I feel the tumbling down, the tumbling down. There was a judge who, puts in the court, and the judge have, what enabled jail. But it could be a spanking, or a smack, or a swat, or a hit. This could beware of judges in courts and jails, and who wasn't? This will be doing the facts of David Cassidy of where, in this case, of feelings. That could make you happy. It could make you sad. It could make you mad. So if you know the facts, so this is like Lucy into a kite. You raced all the way up. This was a race. Now the 8 types will be into the pink rink, and this way could be so very magic. This could be like seeing a woman comes out to grab her, and this is what she grabbed her. So this could be if you lie on the ground. So this could be if you feel the earth move or not.
To order a copy of this program, call 1-800-231-0003.